Good evening and welcome to this BBC News special. At least 1,000 people are feared dead after the biggest earthquake ever recorded in Japan. It measured a massive 8.9 and struck in the middle of the afternoon, a busy time of day when millions of people all over Japan were in their offices, at home or at school, oblivious to what was about to strike. The tremor lasted for a full 2 minutes. Tokyo was badly shaken, but the worst hit area was Sendai in northern Japan, near the epicenter, a coastal city home to more than 1 million people. The quake unleashed a ferocious tsunami. The waves were up to 10 metres high. That's the size of a 3-storey house, and they bore down on the coastline, sweeping everything away in their path. It's feared most of those who died today drowned. We'll be getting the latest from Tokyo live in a moment. But first, Robert Hall reports on the worst earthquake in Japan's history.
And it looks like the tsunami has engulfed several cities.
Terrifying, unstoppable.
Live footage of Miyagi as the tsunami has struck the area.
Along miles of Japanese coastline, the sea is claiming the land. Cars.
As of 7 p.m., the full extent of the damage is still not known.
Ships. Buildings seized by a wall of water, which is sweeping away everything in its path. The tsunami raged through towns and villages. Now choked with debris and smashed homes.
It's a 7 on the Japanese seismic scale of 0 to 7. That is the same size.
Some of the buildings were on fire. No one yet knows the human cost of the tsunami's passing.
Fires breaking out, as you can see, live coverage in the Sendai area, Miyagi Prefecture.
Across farmland, tearing away crops, machinery and livelihoods.
A major earthquake hit Japan Friday afternoon about an hour and 10 minutes ago.
And amongst the terminals of a regional airport.
Japan's meteorological agency says the quake measured magnitude 8.4. It has revised it upwards to 8.4.
Before turning, spent, for the ocean once more. The earthquake had struck at 2:46 on a spring afternoon. Violent tremors shaking communities along 1,300 miles of Japan's eastern seaboard. This is central Sendai, the city closest to the epicenter. Outside the local TV station, disbelief has turned to a realization that the buildings and those around them are in danger. A country more prepared than most for the risk of earthquakes was facing one of the largest on record. Those who fled to safety were experiencing the effects of a seismic shock 8,000 times stronger than the quake which struck Christchurch in New Zealand. In Tokyo, hundreds of miles from the epicenter, Japan's Prime Minister was addressing Parliament when tremors shook the chamber.
I offer my deepest sympathy to the people who have suffered the disaster. An emergency disaster response headquarters has been set up with myself as the head.
By dusk, fires were still raging as a massive rescue effort widened across affected regions. Initial reports spoke of hundreds dead in Sendai alone, with hundreds more missing.
아오모리현 일본의 연안.
Transport and power supplies are severely disrupted. 4 nuclear power stations shut down automatically. One has reported a small radiation leak. Hour by hour, extraordinary pictures have reached millions via Japan's TV networks and the internet. A ship trapped in a giant whirlpool as the retreating tsunami met the incoming tide. A householder desperately trying to alert rescuers. And travellers fleeing for their lives as the flood swept towards them.
We're on the 3rd floor, so we felt quite a big shake, and then everybody was evacuated. And I work in the downtown area of the city, so most people were evacuated and just on the streets, and all the electricity and gas and water have been turned off.
And in Sendai City, tsunami reached 10 kilometers from the coast.
Tsunami warnings have now been issued for the entire Pacific Basin, but so far damage elsewhere has been far less severe. A series of secondary shocks have kept Japan on high alert. The latest death toll is put at more than 1,000. This is expected to be a conservative estimate. 1 train is missing, another derailed. A ship carrying 100 people has been swept away.
His mother is also in serious.
Rescue teams from 45 countries are now on standby as Japan begins to assess the full effects of a catastrophe which will test its preparations and its national resolve to the limits. Robert Hall, BBC News.
Well, let's get the latest now live from Japan. Our correspondent Roland Burke is in Tokyo. And Roland, in a way, it's not over yet, is it? I mean, the strong aftershocks have been shaking Japan all through the night.
Yes, we had one about 2 minutes ago. There have been dozens in the 15 hours since the big quake hit. The most serious about an hour ago in the Nagano and Niigata area over on the other side of Honshu. That one measured 6 on the Japanese scale of intensity, which goes from 1 to 7. And there is a warning there now that perhaps another one might be coming. But the real damage has been on the Pacific coast, north of Tokyo, where the tsunami hit. Horrifying pictures coming out, but now dawn is coming up. Horrifying numbers too. We're hearing that 1,200 homes have been completely destroyed. A university campus completely destroyed. Some schools partially destroyed. In one ward, one small part of the city of Sendai, the police say they found nearly 300 bodies. And in another town on that coast, 300 homes were engulfed by water that swept in at rooftop height.
And in Tokyo, where you are now, as you say, dawn is breaking. But, I mean, thousands of people have been stranded in the city overnight, literally unable to get home.
Yeah, I'm looking around me here. People in the offices around who've been camped out on the floor all night are starting to stir. Many people who live anywhere nearby chose to walk home last night because the trains were suspended. There were millions of people on the streets doing that. What was extraordinary was how calmly and in such an orderly fashion that they did that. People were very calm. I even saw some people on a quiet road with no cars stopping at the traffic lights and waiting for the green man. So even after the shock of that violent earthquake, the worst anybody here has felt in this city in living memory, and desperate to get home, people were still acting in a calm fashion.
Roland, for now, thank you very much. Well, Charlotte Kapani is in Tokyo for work. She arrived there a few days ago for a conference, and she joins me now on Skype. Thank you very much for joining us. Just describe what happened when the quake struck.
Well, when it first started, I didn't really think much of it because, as you said, I've been here since Monday, and we've been feeling some shocks over the last couple of days, and people in the office were saying, well, this is quite normal. So when it first started, I was just thinking it was just another one of the tremors that we've been feeling, but then it just got worse and worse, and things started falling off shelves, and everything was rattling and banging, and everyone in the office was shouting to me to sort of get under the table. So I was sort of underneath the table, just waiting for it to stop. It was just getting more and more intense. And all I was thinking was, I'm on the 8th floor of this building, and, it could come down at any moment. But, it did eventually stop. And then we part of the ceiling had come down in the office, and there was a lot of smoke and a lot of dust, and then there were alarms going, and everyone was saying we just had to evacuate as soon as we can. So we kind of, I didn't even think, we couldn't possibly use the lift, of course, so we had to go down sort of 8 flights of stairs out onto the street, where I don't know, I sort of burst into tears immediately. I think the shock kind of got to me, but everyone was so calm and not, and not really panicking about anything. It was quite extraordinary. Very, very scary though.
But what was the scene like outside? Because of course in Japan they're well used to earthquakes, but you say they were calm. This was a terrible one.
Yeah, it was a terrible one, and all my colleagues said, as you say, they are used to earthquakes, but this is the worst that they'd ever experienced. But they just seemed to know what to do. So we sort of waited for maybe about 20 minutes or so. My main concern was actually there were quite a lot of buildings around us, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen there. But then we decided because we'd left everything, we just left bags, coats, laptops, everything up in the office. So we went back up into the office to get our stuff, and then more aftershocks started coming, so we just packed everything as quickly as we could and came back down out, and then the word was, we just have to get to an open space.
It's very good to see that you are safe and sound. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
No, thank you very much.
Well, Japan is no stranger to earthquakes, but as you saw, this really was an extraordinary one. Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh is here. Just let's talk first of all about this nuclear reactor. It sounds like there is a pretty worrying situation going on there.
It could be worrying. The situation is that we have a nuclear reactor where the pressure is building up because there's a problem with the cooling system. The authorities want to relieve that pressure by venting steam from the cooling system. The problem is that steam could be radioactive. The Japanese nuclear authorities are playing the situation down, saying that if it is radioactive, it's probably only slightly radioactive. It poses no risk to human health or the environment, but we will have to wait and see if that really is the case.
And in terms of the earthquakes themselves, Japan has, hundreds every year?
Well, that's right. The entire Pacific Rim region is known as the Ring of Fire. And this illustration will show you. It just shows that red line shows where the Earth's tectonic plates meet. And when they rub up against each other, you get volcanic activity and, of course, earthquakes. Now, let's just zoom in towards Japan. And what you'll see is that region has even more tectonic plates than normal. Lots of them rubbing up against each other, which is why, as you say, there are hundreds of earthquakes each year, but many of them barely register. But on this occasion, there was a sudden large jolt, which led to the country having its largest earthquake ever.
And it seems that the tsunami is what has done the most destruction. Most people who have died are feared to have drowned.
Well, that's right. Now, the tsunami is caused when these plates actually connect together. One slips underneath the other, and that raises the seabed up. That, in turn, raises the water up, we can see from this illustration, and that results in a giant tidal wave that we call a tsunami. It's different from a normal wave in that it travels so fast, nearly 500 miles an hour, until it hits land, and then it can rise up even further. As you said, 3 stories high, that high, and it can, as we've seen in Robert Hall's report, it can surge well into the land for several miles, causing huge devastation. There have never been pictures that have been captured quite like it in the moment.
And what have seismologists been saying about it?
Well, seismologists have been relieved that the tsunami hasn't spread to other parts of the world. This giant tidal wave has spread all across the world, and the worry was that we'd get a repeat of what happened in 2004. That's not happened, and they've said that they're relieved that that's the case.
The fault has broken along a line hundreds of kilometres long, tens of kilometres wide, and all that amount of land has suddenly moved by several metres. That's an enormous amount of movement. It's an enormous amount of energy.
That was a huge amount of energy that's been released. At the moment, it's caused great devastation in Japan. Fortunately, it doesn't seem to have caused the same devastation that we'd been expecting in other parts of the world.
OK, Palab Ghosh, thank you very much. Well, dozens of countries have already offered to help the Japanese. The United Nations says Japan has just requested help from some international search and rescue teams. Here, the Queen has sent a message to Japan's Emperor to express her sadness at the loss of life. And President Obama and David Cameron also extended their sympathies to the people of Japan.
Today's events remind us of just how fragile life can be. Our hearts go out to our friends in Japan and across the region, and we're going to stand with them as they recover and rebuild from this tragedy.
Had a terrible reminder of the destructive power of nature, and everyone should be thinking of that country and their people, and I've asked immediately that our government should look at what we can do to help.
David Cameron and President Obama speaking a short time ago. Well, after the earthquake, phone lines went down very quickly, making it impossible to get through. But people in Japan were still able to get the latest information and pictures out very quickly using the internet. Terrible images and stories spread fast around the world on social networking sites like Facebook and Twitter. Our correspondent, John Brain, now looks at some of the stories of courage and survival of people trapped in offices and homes as the quake struck.
One home, one family's experience of a national disaster. The chaos filmed on mobile phone as the panicked householders run out onto the streets. It was an ordeal shared by millions across the country. The quake struck in the middle of the working day, bringing pandemonium to offices. Everywhere from banks to medical centres affected by the aftershocks.
Tsunami warning to Kanto and Okinawa in coastal areas.
In the supermarket, staff could only watch as groceries fell from the shelves. The earthquake drove people onto the streets, only to hear the sirens warning of the impending tsunami. But these were the fortunate ones, survivors of a tragedy which has claimed the lives of so many others. John Brain, BBC News.
Well, let's go back now to Japan, to our correspondent Roland Burke in Tokyo. And dawn is breaking there now, and I guess it's only now that the full extent of this disaster is going to be revealed.
Yes, I think that is the case. During the night, we've been getting snippets of information. The picture in local areas where people have got to, of schools partially destroyed and homes destroyed. And also 4 trains are missing as well, we're being told by Japan Railways. What we're expecting now that dawn is coming up is that the Prime Minister is going to be going up to the worst affected areas in Sendai, and also the rescuers who are already there, troops and the police and the fire brigade. They're going to start to be bolstered as well. The plan is for the US 7th Fleet, which is based in the Pacific, to send warships off Japan's northeastern coast, and that'll be helping the rescue effort there.
And I think the extraordinary thing about this disaster was that people in Japan and all around the world were watching a tsunami live as it hit the coast.
Yes, that is extraordinary, and seeing it from the air as well. I was in Sri Lanka during the tsunami in the Indian Ocean, and when you're down on the ground, it feels incredibly powerful as the waves hit you. But to see the waves racing across the fields, carrying houses and cars and boats with them, and debris and mud, and the speed they moved across those fields really makes you realise the enormous power of that volume of water eating up the land.
And the death toll continues to rise. Very unclear, the figures at the moment. Estimates in Japan more than 1,000, but just looking at those pictures, you must think it's going to climb perhaps higher than that.
One would have thought so. It's been climbing through the night. At the moment, the official toll is 1,000 dead and missing. In terms of the earthquake itself, many buildings here are so well built that they didn't fall down, but the tsunami, that's what's done the real damage here.
Roland Burt with the latest there from Tokyo. Thank you very much. So large swathes of the northeast of Japan have literally been swept away by the tsunami's giant waves. Thousands and thousands of homes are gone. And all the while, the death toll continues to rise. There's more coverage of the disaster throughout the evening on the BBC News Channel. But for now, we'll leave you with some of the extraordinary images from today.
And it looks like the tsunami has engulfed several cities as the tsunami has struck the area, obviously engulfing farms.
大分県豊後水道以南、宮崎県、鹿児島県東部。
車完全に流されてます。
You're seeing a fire that is completely raging out of control. This oil refinery up in blaze. You see someone inside that building waving a white towel, seeking help.